Mari is an interculturalist consultant and trainer, a physician assistant in family medicine, and a marriage and family therapist with a focus on issues of multiculturalism and diversity. To kick off our afternoon of presenters, please welcome Mari Alexander.
I have to lower the mic. All right. Welcome back. I wanted to start this afternoon by first just saying that I've been a therapist for a long time. I've seen a lot of people, and it's a real privilege. So I just really want you all to know, and sometimes my clients are surprised when they'll say thank you when they leave my office, and they'll say, thank you. I learned so much, I grow so much. And I go to those places that I don't always want to go to with my clients. So thank you for having the trust and for honoring me with your presence in my office and here. So I've had a recurring dream for many years, and I think I finally got what it was about. In the dream, I live in a beautiful set of rooms. I can see it in my mind's eye right now, filled with oriental rugs, exotic plants, beautiful art, and a black Steinway grand piano. There are no windows, and there's only one entranceway. The catch is the only way to get into these rooms is to crawl into a small door, like the door in a cave, and slither up the tunnels to the top of a huge rock formation that opens up into my home. I've had this dream at least 25 times as an adult. I work so hard to make myself as small as I can, and then I get my reward. So what messages have I gleaned in my life, subliminally, explicitly, unconsciously, that led me to think I had to accommodate or shrink myself in order to get what I wanted? I've been offering training programs in cultural competency to medical providers mainly and mental health providers for many years, wanting to expand people's awareness of difference and to gain understanding with people we deem as not like us. In this country, at least in some sectors, we're finally giving more than lip service to the need to relate to our brothers and sisters, to be inclusive and to make space for opportunity and success, however that's defined by people of all cultures, races, ethnicities, faiths, lifestyles, gender identities, everyone. One of the main areas I focused on is unconscious bias. Am I getting too close? No, it's okay. What it is, where does it come from, and how can we decrease its hold on us? Social justice advocates, understandably, shy away from focusing on what's the brain's role in unconscious bias. There's concern that it'll be justification for bias, as well as the aggressive actions that often stem from it. I don't think it's justification. I think it's part of the picture. Can we take responsibility for it and take charge of it? Yes, we can. The amygdala, the house of our unconscious or implicit memories, scans up to 100 times every second, looking for potential danger. It sees people we encounter as either similar, which is safe, or dissimilar, potentially dangerous. So when someone comes into your office or clinic and they look different than you thought they would, your antennas for, different. What happens? Probably a split second of surprise, and then maybe a question of, how should I be with this person? I don't know what to do. It sets you off guard. Our brains have a huge job of helping us decipher, make sense, categorize, manage 11 million pieces of information that we're confronted with all the time, every second. Imagine. A tall task. Since we can only handle, some people say up to 40, I think for me it's more like 4 bytes at a time. The brain gets its information from via neurons that are all over the body, from our skin and muscles to our heart and gut. The latter actually contains more neurons than the brains in our skull. So there's more information coming from my tummy, and it's really loud right now, up to my brain. It's a lot of information coming at us from all different directions. And there's more. Just as we're conscious of only about 5% of what's held in our brains, so we don't know all about the other sources that inform our brains. As you listen, imagine messages you've received in your lives that may have come from these sources. Let's start with culture. Our culture is the bedrock of our values and belief systems. So does your culture focus on number one? Self-reliance, independence being valued? Or is it one where the value of the group carries much more weight than the value of one? What traditions from your culture enrich your life and create a sense of belonging? What role does time play? How do you feel welcomed in a culture that may be a culture of togetherness or not? I lived in Senegal for a while with my family, and we had Peace Corps volunteers that would come to me and say, I don't have any privacy. There are people around me all the time. They'd be in their village and they'd try to go into their hut and they'd go, what are you doing in there alone? Because they thought it was really sad and depressing and that we shouldn't be alone. Can you imagine how the American volunteers might have felt? So, just one example. So let's say you're from a culture that believes in togetherness and you live here, in our culture. I've done a lot of work with Fulbright scholars. And one of the biggest questions they ask me, I'll say, so what's that thing you're worried about that's right here when you get on the plane to come to the States? And they'll say, because I won't belong. Because people are sort of nice for a minute, but there's not a sense of welcome. And I think that there is in our country, but we do it differently. So how do we communicate who's in charge in our culture? Is it always up to us? Free will and grit? Or is it our destiny in the hands of a deity, or Allah, or God? It makes a huge difference. What expectations does your culture hold for you? Beliefs, customs, mores that are held in our faith or religion are also embedded in our unconscious and can create dis-ease and alienation when we feel we're not respected or we're misunderstood, or we feel we need to compromise how we practice our faith in order to fit in or to stay safe. Society's view of gender roles and expectations dictate how you live, who gets educated, who can be a leader or an athlete, who has power and who does not. We receive strong messages every day about what we, as women, can and cannot do, or shouldn't do. That's part of what's going on in the Me Too, right? Those messages. How many men don't fit the mold of our culture or the dominant culture? I wonder how it is for men who'd prefer taking care of children than working outside the home. Socioeconomic status, from privilege to poverty, and all the prejudice and power inherent in these strata also exist and are implicit. Studies have shown that the more privilege a person has, the less likely he or she is to show empathy, loan money, even obey traffic laws. There's a fellow named Paul Piff from UCLA. Look him up. It's really interesting. People who are differently abled, whether needing assistance with mobility or assistance with emotional support. What stories are in our implicit about people with these kinds of needs? What messages have we all received about mental health? We've talked about today. Hiding problems you might have. Don't get help. Don't talk about your dirty laundry. Does it cost too much? You're weak and just need to buck up. Such strong messages that don't allow us to really live and take care of ourselves the way we should. Then there's intergenerational trauma. What our parents and grandparents have lived through and the protections they created often get transferred to us and inform our brains. Consciously or unconsciously, we use what happened in the past to build our anticipation of the future. A dear friend of mine was raised by a mom who had been an Auschwitz survivor. When my friend had children of her own, she was ridiculed and scorned for her protectiveness of her children. She was fearful they would be harmed, just as her mom had fears. She'd integrated her mother's fears and they'd become her own. Residue of the dehumanization that took place in our country to justify slavery, whether we were from slaves or slave masters, lives inside us. Epigenetics illustrates how specific genes are turned on or off in response to perceived stress from maybe 100 years ago, even if it's not present now. Lastly, for this talk are the implicit memories of our own childhood, from pre-birth on, of the joys as well as the fears, the accomplishments as well as the traumas, receiving slights, put-downs, judgments, assumptions of who we are and what we can do without even knowing who we are, knowingness, often expressed subtly. They're called microaggressions. And then they're not copped to. I was just teasing. Dismissing the aggression as well as our experience of it. These aggressions on their own create havoc for our health and well-being and stop people from pursuing jobs, even causing depression and compromising our immune systems. So you can see that there are many, many sources that, though mostly not explicit, influence how we perceive, how we make decisions, how we act and react every day. It informs us as providers to our patients and clients, as teachers with our students, as bosses with our employees, and as policemen and lawmakers toward those they are protecting. Based on how our brains operate, evolution appears to have been far more interested in keeping us alive than making us happy. Negative emotions trump positive ones and weigh more heavily in our evaluations of people, including ourselves. The amygdala, that houser of our implicits, it's quick to learn and slow to forget. Learned fears are tenacious and tend to return under stress. Fear is not easily forgotten, whereas learning not to fear is fragile and often goes away over time. While we tend to focus on how these unconscious biases impact how we relate to the world, they're also directed inwardly toward ourselves. There's a lot of press about what's happening out there, but what's happening inside? How have we taken that in? They distort our truth of ourselves. They fuel self-questioning and inhibit us from taking risks and from challenging ourselves. We get caught in the pain of not knowing who we are or what we want, and we get focused on what we think others want us to be. When this happens over time, we feel depleted. Our thinking is foggy, our memory isn't sharp, we reach out less and less and don't engage socially. Emotionally, we're more fragile and more vulnerable to life's pressures. So the cycle of too much or too little, basically not okay how we are, can take us over. So if this is going on outside of our consciousness, how can we know when our implicit biases are showing up? We have a great communicator, all built in, and it's called our body. We know that when we feel anxious or triggered, our cortisol, that great hormone, level goes up. It increases our heart rate, causing tightness in our chests, our heads to ache, our hearts to pound, even our thinking and memory. We don't know, we forget where we were. Do you ever go into one room and, what did I come in here for? Or you're trying to find that word and it's your job interview and you can't find it? Yeah, I'm seeing some nods. Okay. So the first step is to become more tuned in to our bodies. Remember, there are neurons in every part. What we need to do is listen. When I was a little girl, my belly used to bloat up so much I looked like I'd swallowed a basketball. It was my gut telling me that something was going on that I needed to pay attention to. My belly was my barometer, signaling me to stop and take time to soothe myself. It became my messenger and my friend. Right now, my hand over my heart soothes me as I acknowledge I'm a little nervous. Another way we can feel hijacked by ourselves is when our default, there's a thing called a default mode network. I'm going to call it a DMN, so you'll know. Made up of several regions of the brain. When it gets activated, the DMN is thought to be more active during passive rest, not fair, and mind wandering. We should be able to do that. Which usually revolves around, guess what? Thinking of others, thinking of ourselves, remembering the past. You can imagine my voice, it's like, oh yeah, those nice times. And then it gets activated, and what happens? We start ruminating. We start getting into negative loops. And sometimes we get stuck. And then we become victims of, what if? What if this? What if that? Then what? We get caught. We get caught in the what ifs that don't have answers, and the questions that don't have resolution. All the elements of ourselves and our histories inform our brains. Our implicit memories draw from them to aid how we navigate ourselves through the world. The job description makes sense, but it needs refinement, and we can do it. We can help ourselves. We can create new neuronal pathways to help us become more aware of what our body brains are trying to tell us. And we can shift gears. There's a fancy name for it we all know called neuroplasticity. Basically, it means we can change. And it starts with becoming more and more aware of what influences our thoughts and our actions. So we all have demons, parts of our background that hijack us and challenge our ability to know what we're feeling, to know our own truths and then speak them, to voice our needs and desires, to reach out and ask for help, to dare to dream and pursue those dreams, to live from our own intention, to be as big or little as we choose, and not what our family, our culture, our community, our profession. It's risky to choose. It's risky to show up and tell the truth. But clearly, all of these presenters have done just that. They've had to deal with their demons of uncertainty, of judgment and prejudice, of failing. They've had to risk being ostracized, not belong, and they did risk it. And they have shared how they were able to feel themselves, to know themselves, and to act on their own behalf. I'm sure it was difficult and full of challenges that even they, at some point, couldn't have imagined they would surmount. But they did. And they became the successful women they are today. Yay. So how can we shift our implicit biases and not get caught in reacting or negative loops that disconnect us from ourselves and each other? The ideas I'm going to tell you are going to sound so simple, and the simple things in life are sometimes the hardest, right? So the first one is to slow down. Just lessening our expectations of how productive we should be in any one day will create some empty space to be tuned in. Just be. Check in with our bodies frequently. Make it a habit. 2-3 times a day, take an inventory. What's happening here? Oh, wow, my shoulder's been hurting all day. What's going on? How do our bodies feel? Where are we tense? Get familiar with your different body states, from relaxation to contraction. You're integrating body awareness, which offers you information about your emotional state of being. And it's there all the time, accessible for you. As soon as you recognize that you're feeling tense, anxious, or sad, some say stimulated, pause. This will help you to not become the feeling, but to watch or witness it like a wave. Name the feeling if you can. Acknowledge it. Some say if you name your feeling, you can tame it. Then, with curiosity, if there's one word I'd love for you to walk away with today, it's curiosity. Explore. What might be going on that your shoulders are contracted, that your head or your heart is pounding, or that you're uncomfortable with the situation or the person that you're with? Curiosity without judgment. Didn't we hear that earlier today? Decreases the impulse for a call to action. Your focus stays open and your options available to you. It allows your brain to reality test the stories that you're generating about yourself or the other. It actually keeps your perceptual field from closing in, which is what happens when we get spiked, when we get triggered. You're exploring, not judging. Your cortisol is not spiking, and you have access. Next, empathy. Where should the empathy start? Yourself. This could be a time you could offer yourself some. Even just saying to yourself, wow, this is really hard. I really don't want to like that person. I don't want to like her shoes. Whatever, I remember somebody said something about shoes earlier. Or, I don't want to disappoint my kids. This is really hard. That's all. Amazing how receiving empathy can take the fire out of our fury and the sting out of the insult. We so want to be listened to. Empathy is listening with our hearts. It's not about fixing, advising, comparing, even apologizing. It's just listening. Sometimes just being without words, holding the space with someone. You feel it. We all know when we've been heard, it's also much easier to listen. We know that when we can interrupt the reaction, there's much more possibility of responding with better outcome. We know that if we can name what we're feeling, they don't feel so big. One of the things I think is so important about all of us being members, yes, me too, of the Me Too movement, is just this, is that we're naming it. We're having a voice about it. It's no longer hidden. We know that if we can name, not only is it not so big, but we can give our brains a chance to actually mediate. And that's what our brains are for. We have a part of the brain called the hippocampus. It holds all the memories that we can make pictures of. And it helps inform us. We also have what's this great thing called the prefrontal cortex, that we know that it takes a while to develop. And that also mediates. It reality tests. You know, when you've reality tested your concerns with a friend, how much better you feel. Well, you have these friends all the time. It takes practice. It takes being tuned into ourselves, to what emotional state we're in, and sometimes it takes another person. Often it takes another person. Being accompanied. We know that when we're with another, challenges seem less scary, less unsurmountable. Mountains don't seem so high. Another piece to reclaiming our emotional state involves that DMN. When it's activated and we're stuck, or feeling badly, if we actually get up, do something that requires our full attention of multiple parts of our brain, we can interrupt it. We don't have to be slaves to it. What's kind of fun is the activities that really can make a difference do require different parts of our brain and our body. So guess what? Being creative, playing music, singing, playing with your kids, gardening, all these things interrupt that cycle. What helps you become more tuned into your emotional state as a general rule is meditation. We've heard about that too today. It helps you pause more easily, it broadens your perceptions, and it allows you to see what is yours and what's not. It's also known to interrupt that same ruminating. Focusing on your breath, taking air in all the way down to your belly and then slowly exhaling it, then do it again. Sounds simple. Many of you I know practice it, some of you may not. Even a few minutes a day can make a difference. So I started this talk with my dream. I'd like to end sharing the process I've been in these last weeks that has brought me to this stage with you today, and you'll understand my dream. Initially, I was excited and pleased that I'd been asked to be a part of this conference. A few years ago, I'd met Gayatri and heard her story and was so inspired and impassioned by her. I read her book within the week, and I thought, okay, I'm going to contact her. I got shy and I never did. Shortly thereafter, after she began sending me, after I met her, information about the conference, and I began to feel uneasy in my gut. I began making up stories inside. I didn't have anything to offer. The stories got louder. When I read about the other speakers she'd asked to come, my bio was not robust, I thought. I hadn't published or spoken at many events. Everyone was sharing their story, and it would inspire us all. My intellectual piece would be shallow and uninspiring, I thought. When we met in person, she said sweetly, just tell your story. I thought of the other stories that these amazing women would be sharing today, how inspiring and strong they were to have lived what they had, and I had no story. I haven't been courageous and weathered what they have. At night, I'd actually wake up and address you all. It sounded so good in the middle of the night, but by dawn it seemed silly. I had arguments in my head. I can't do this. Of course you can. I'm a fraud. I'm going to be found out. That would be devastating. I'll lose my peers' respect of me, be rejected or ostracized, and mainly I'll feel ashamed. All the dialogues, the negative loops landed me in the world of not enough. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would be sharing what I was going through about being here. Didn't dawn on me till about 10 days ago. When I decided that this is what was real for me, I felt my anxiety just go whoop, at least for a while. That was the clue that it was what I needed to do. I told myself that I just had to do it. Great phrase that has never worked for me in the past, but I was getting down to the wire, so I began to write. Whatever. I began to realize that this experience, the fear I was feeling, this vulnerability that was paralyzing me, was not new. In fact, it's been a part of me for as long as I can remember. The talks I used to give to myself as a kid about how I could be different the next day so I'd be more accepted. I had no reason for my feelings and knew that expressing feelings, especially fear, was a weakness. I needed to stand alone. I was from a family that looked good on the outside, but was in pain behind closed doors. I was a good secret keeper and became an even better empath. My fears became less palpable, my needs not worth mentioning, anger was non-existent, and I tried to be very, very small and safe. Like my dream, and I went numb. Problem with being numb is that it isn't selective, so everything gets numbed. Much of my adult life, I prided myself on not having 3 emotions. Shame, not me. Fear, of nothing. Anger never happens. Now, what I do have is humility and all of the above. So here I was just last week. This is so fresh, thinking I can't do this. I can't be part of this conference. I have nothing to share that will inspire you, my audience. I realized I was completely caught in my own negative loop, and I was not just ashamed of it, but as angry as well, that at my age, after all I've done, here I am yet again. Feeling too small and insignificant and full of fear to share this stage. I was the little girl again, who felt barely visible. I'd lost myself, and I had to find her, be her. I have one precious life to live, and it's time to do it. And then now is the time. So my life mission has been to make a difference in the world. Leave it with more than I took from it. By guiding, supporting, facilitating what works, people to claim and be who they are, to be authentic, real, and live the truth, their truth. I've made a difference, I know that, sometimes more than others, and I've midwifed people as they came into their own. I just haven't been able to do it for myself, and for that I have felt shame. I always hated the phrase, you can't love another until you love yourself. Hated it. Because loving others, my children, my partners, my friends, my clients, has been the closest I've come to me. I've just known that there was probably more. The times that I felt my body shake and tremble have been around public speaking, being in the light, showing up. There have been times when I didn't even know what it was that I said. I hadn't put it together before how consistently I've been fearful to show up and take the light, even for 30 minutes. So this has been a gift. Thank you. Provocative and yes, painful, but a gift as I've acknowledged my fears, my anger, and the shame that have kept me small. I've given you a bit about what informs our brains. I hope it'll entice you to learn more about the influences that inform your biases and negative loops. What got laid down from traumas from long ago, across generations? What values and beliefs have been handed down to you from your culture? Are they relevant now? Do they hold them? Do they hold your truth now? What gender roles dictated how you could show up? Do you feel you need to hide to be safe or diminish yourself in order to be accepted or to belong? What was going on in your family when you were born, when you were conceived and raised that influenced how you see the world and see yourself? We've each learned a myriad of ways to protect ourselves, most of them unconscious. Now's the time to reality test those protective ways, have more of ourselves to live from, and that takes consciousness and accompaniment. It's scary, but I believe the reward is great. It is the why we are here. It is the me I am seeking. Venture into yourself and grow new eyes that look not only out, but within. Thank you.